A completely black frame with no visible content.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Tent of Many Voices. The Tent of Many Voices is part of the core of Discovery 2 Traveling Lewis and Clark exhibit. This is a multi-agency federal exhibit with the National Park Service being the lead agency. And what we do is we travel around the country, primarily on the Lewis and Clark Trail, and as we set up in these different communities, we have this Tent of Many Voices, where we can bring in a wide variety of presenters to share with us these different voices, these different perspectives, both on the Lewis and Clark expedition, its legacy, but we also like to hear from the descendants of those indigenous nations, those American Indian peoples that had been living where Lewis and Clark traveled for thousands of years. And that's what we're going to do this morning to start off. We're going to hear from Ron Snake Edmo. And Ron is a member of the Shoshone Bannock tribe. He is a veteran of the U.S. military and a warrior in the traditional sense. He is a published author, a poet. He is also a linguistic anthropologist. And he's going to share with us some of the language and culture of the Shoshone Bannock people. So let's give him a warm welcome here to the Tent of Many Voices.
Thank you. Nananeha Dokwa, Fort Hall night. I am called Snake. I'm from Fort Hall. That's my introduction to my language. First off, I would like to welcome you to this Tent of Many Voices. This tent is located in what we call Nua Sogabia. Nua means the people. That's what the Shoshonean people call ourselves, is the Nua. But other people call us Shoshone, Bionics, and all that stuff. So our term for us is Nua. Sogobia means the Mother Earth. Sogop is the word for the land. Bia is our word for mother. And in our traditional ways, we believe that the earth is our mother. We're the same color. We come from the earth. We've been here forever. Archaeologists have gone down to the 8,000 year level in their digs, and it's been...
A person wearing glasses and a headband holds a microphone while standing indoors. Behind them is a screen displaying a green image, and maps and educational materials are visible on the wall.
Straight Shoshone for the whole time there, so we've been here for a long time. When I was a child, I was adopted out and lived away from my people for quite a few years. When I was in my 40s, I came back to my people. And when I came back into our homeland, I felt the spirits of my ancestors. Now, we've lived our homeland, our traditional homelands. This is just one small portion of it. Our homeland stretched from the Sierra Nevadas to the Black Hills, from Canada to Mexico. We have the largest homeland of any Indian peoples in this country. But as you know now, we only possess a small portion, just a little drop of our homelands. And that's one of the things I'll be talking about. So anyway, welcome to Nua Sogabia. Now, I'm an anthropologist. In other words, I study cultures of different people. I'm a linguistic anthropologist, so I study languages, how languages work, what the meaning is, and especially the part I work on is language preservation. A people lose a portion of their culture if they lose their language. Now, unfortunately, English is the common language that all indigenous peoples in North America speak now. Some of us speak our own languages, but that's not very many. And that's a problem because as our elders die, they're the last fluent speakers of our language. When they die, that knowledge is gone. But we can only we can only express certain things in our language that can't be translated adequately into another language. Because we translate not just the language, but also the culture. For example, one of my poems is called Ondabeche Bedep in Shoshone. And that tells the whole story, just the title of the poem itself. And what it means is, English translation of that title is Stranger Arrives. When I write, I always call the American Stranger with a capital S, like John Wayne and his Pilgrim. So that's, if you see my writings, when I talk about stranger, I'm talking about the American. So Ondabeche Woho is a combination of two words, a coined word. It's Ondabeche means people of another tribe, and Woho is enemy. And until things change, that's how I have to describe the American. But the second word, bedep, is a verb. And our verbs are very active compared to English verbs. And so bida is the actual verb itself. The p is the suffix. But what that p means is the stranger came.
A person wearing glasses and a patriotic headband stands at a microphone in front of a display board. They hold a red object in one hand while gesturing, with maps and images visible on the board behind them.
The Lewis and Clark expedition came into our homeland with just a few people. But now that small group of people has grown into a large population. So now we're outnumbered by the visitors to our country. So I tell the whole story just with the title. But in English, of course, I have to tell the story because there's no equivalent in English of telling a whole story with just one or two words, which is unfortunate. But English itself is a very complex language because it has so many other languages that are a part of it that have been adopted or borrowed. So it's even English itself is a complex language. Okay, but what is main thing is this idea that we can only say certain things like with a couple words in our language or express a whole concept. But when we try to translate that word into English, we have to tell the whole concept behind, the whole culture behind it. Because like when I talk about Sogobia, to me, the earth, she's my mother. And when I die, I'll return back to her. I'm of her. I'm of the same color as our mother. But when I talk to people of different culture, they don't have that same concept. Now that concept is kind of coming into the American viewpoint because of the environmental movement. And the environmental movement is finally starting to get the message that we have to protect our mother. We have to protect the earth. We have to protect the water that we drink. We have to protect the air that we breathe. And the closer you get to cities, you're going to find you can't breathe the air because it's so polluted. You can't drink the water in a lot of places because it's polluted with chemicals or other things. So, this is a concern for our people because we're kind of stewards of the land because we've been here for thousands and thousands of years. But our visitors that come into our lands, it's a concern for them too because they have to breathe the same air that we breathe. They have to drink the same water we drink. So, you don't want to poison your own self. That's essentially what that message is. So, the visitors that come into our land, if they understand who we are, our tie to the land, then they can appreciate better what they're seeing. And like when you buy a piece of property, you have a responsibility to protect that land. You can't just pollute that land. There's a responsibility because you're only here for a short time. And then you're going to walk on to the next world, and then somebody else is going to have that piece of property. And it will just go in perpetuity.
A person wearing glasses and a black shirt stands at a microphone, holding a book or pamphlet. Behind them is a display board with maps and green imagery. The setting appears to be an indoor presentation space.
But if you poison that land or you destroy that land, then pretty soon it's just wasteland. It's not good for anything. Not even plants will grow on it in some areas. So this is things that we ask that everybody else that comes into our country to respect our land because we'll be here, we're survivors. And we'll be here long after the American goes. I don't know what will happen that causes you to go, but it probably won't be very good. Since you live amongst us, we'll also be affected by that too. So, even though people pray, some of our people pray that you all disappear, what would make you disappear will also probably make us disappear. So, it's a two-edged sword, so to speak. Now, another thing about culture. The American government has tried to destroy our cultures over the years. And it's even still going on today. In my lifetime, I was born in 1945. In my lifetime, I saw termination and relocation. Termination and relocation was a policy set forth in the Eisenhower years. And what that entailed was to remove all the Indians from the reservations, move us to the cities, and then take the land to give away to the non-Indian people. Why they would want to take our lands from us, what we got left, is beyond me, because they have everything else. And another thing that was involved was taking our children from us, from our people, without benefit of law. You could go in and just say, I want that kid as a souvenir, and take that kid. That's what happened to me. I was taken by missionaries. Also, we weren't allowed to speak our languages in schools. It resulted in severe beatings. But we learned English through the whip, through that yardstick that those teachers used to have. So now for me, it's difficult for me to speak my language because as an adoptee, I wasn't around my people, so I didn't hear our language after I was 8 years old. Now today, my hearing isn't very well from being in war. Those artillery rounds and stuff like that, they kind of ruin your hearing, so to speak. So now I can't hear all the sounds when I'm trying to learn my language, so I write my language better than I speak it or hear it, because I can only speak what I can hear. So I will never be a fluent speaker because of that, which is sad because I can't pass on a lot of knowledge to my children and my grandchildren. So that means the elders today, the 70 and 80 and 90...
A person wearing sunglasses and a headband holds up a pink card while speaking into a microphone. Behind them is a poster about Lewis and Clark. They are indoors at what appears to be a presentation or lecture.
100-year-olds that are still fluent speakers, if they talk to me, I can't understand what they're saying because I only have one good ear. So that knowledge is lost when they die. But as a linguistic anthropologist, one of the things that we're doing, we have a Shoshone language program at Idaho State University. And we developed a writing system we call, as anthropologists and linguists call, writing systems orthographies. That's a technical term. But anyway, we created an orthography that's user-friendly, that can be used on a computer, or if anybody still has them, typewriters. It was originally developed for typewriters, but technologies rendered those obsolete. I've seen one typewriter in the last 10 years. Anyway, our languages have never been written before, so as a linguist, we have to understand the rules of the language. In other words, we have to know what verbs, identify the verbs, how they work, identify the nouns, identify the adverbs and adjectives and all that other stuff, and then figure out how the sentences are structured. And that is the English and Shoshone sentence structure is completely different. English, you have the subject, your verb, followed by the object that the verb acts upon. Well, in Shoshone, we start out with the subject, but then we have we have the object, and then we have the verb. But our verbs have a lot of prefixes and suffixes. So we rarely use just the root verb itself, but we modify that with the prefixes and suffixes. For example, when we here is something or there is something, we we have 6 different words that we use depending on the location of that object from the speaker. It's always from the speaker's point of view. In other words, you can touch something, one word. If it's close enough but not close enough to touch, then I'd use a different verb or different word, location word. Like in the crowd here, throw there, a different word. Then, as far as I can see, out when I
Sorry, they can't hear you. You're covering up the transmitter here.
sorry.
Hold it up a little higher.
Can you hear me? Okay.
A person wearing glasses, a headband with stars and stripes, and a black jacket holds a white piece of paper in both hands while standing in front of educational maps on a wall.
Let me move this here. Not used to this newfangled stuff. So anyway, we have that distance verb or distance word that describes the location from the speaker's position. But in English, you can't tell where an object is located when you speak about it. Like I could say, I'd have to say like, okay, on such and such a corner in Salmon to give you a location. But I don't know my way around Salmon, so I can't give an example of what's where. So anyway, that makes translation difficult, so we have to, when we translate from Shoshone into English, we have to try to convey some of that distance that we're talking about. Another word is to go somewhere. Well, our word for go depends on the manner in which you go. Like if you go, like I'm from Fort Hall right now. That's where my home is. So I came here to Salmon, but then I would return back to Fort Hall. So I'd use one word for that, for go. And so like if I'm telling someone I'm going to go somewhere, but when I use that verb to go, they'll know that I'm going to come back in a short time. I'm just going to go do my business, come right back. But if I'm going to come here and then go to Missoula, and then Butte or somewhere else, and then Yellowstone, and then finally come back home, then I'd use a different verb for that. And you could tell just by that. But again, when I translate into English, I'd have to say, well, I'm going to go to Salmon, then to Butte and Missoula, wherever it was, and finally back home again in about a month or whatever. So that's what makes translation difficult, along with the sentence structure itself. We also have, as far as person, in English you have a singular and you have plural. Plural is 2 or more. Well, in Shoshone languages, we have 3 persons. You have the singular, then you have dual, which is only 2, and that comes inclusive and exclusive. If it's exclusive, then say, for example, I use the dual form, and it's exclusive, then it'd be just you two, but not me. But if I use the inclusive form, then it'd be you and me, but he would be excluded. Then we have plural, which is 3 or more, and again, you have that inclusive and exclusive. And the inclusive means the speaker itself, him or herself. So again, that shows you the difference in our languages. And so that, again, that has to be translated. You know, are we talking 2 people? Are we talking 20 people? We have to, or 3 or
A person wearing sunglasses and a headband stands holding a microphone, gesturing with their left arm outstretched. They wear a black shirt and leather vest. Behind them is a large map or educational poster on the wall.
more people. We have to specify it in our translations. Then again, certain things like Sogobia, our concept of the earth. We have to explain the whole concept, the whole cultural concept, to people that don't have that same concept in their worldview. In other words, we have to translate worldview into a different worldview. Now, if you're a Shoshone person that's lived in the Shoshone land, on the reservations your whole life, and you've had very little contact outside of that, then it'd be more difficult, because in order to be a successful translator, you have to translate into another culture, but you have to understand that culture to do it. So for me, I thought it was unfortunate that I was adopted, but then it turned to be a positive thing because I understand the other culture. Plus, in my military, I was a Green Beret, so I work with indigenous peoples throughout the world. And so this learning a new culture was a benefit to me when I went to different countries. Because working with indigenous people, one of the things you have to do is do a cultural study before you go in. So you know who they are, what their belief system is, what the government in their world is, what their system is there a conflict? Are we going to overthrow that government? Are we going to strengthen that government? Of course, you know, our government makes that decision, but when we go in, we do what our government wants us to do. But if you have people go in and they don't have any idea about culture, how important culture is, then they might blow the whole mission. And unfortunately, the United States tends to do that quite a bit. Let's see. Now, also, when I write in my language, I can transform, this is something I've been experimenting with in my poetry, making transformations from an ordinary world to the spiritual world. Now, in our traditional ways, the spiritual world is just as valid as this physical world that we have here. Like, we see, some of us can see the spirits and hear them. Others, they're completely blind and deaf to that. But I don't know if I'm fortunate or if I'm cursed, but I see things sometimes, and I hear things, and things come to me. So in that way, some stuff I can try to explain in my writing, but others I just can't do it because there's no corresponding concept in the American world. But again, so we live in two cultures. You know, we live within our culture, which is struggling, but we're also living within your culture. But again, even though like we have
A person wearing white framed sunglasses, a black shirt, and a headband holds a microphone in one hand while raising a pink cylindrical object in the other arm. Behind them is a large informational poster about Lewis and Clark.
a town called Pocatello next to us. But a lot of our people, if they do go into town, they just go in the shop, or unfortunately some go to drink. But that's the only contact they have with that culture out there. But the people that live in Pocatello, 50,000 of them, probably 90% of them have never been to the reservation, so they don't really know who we are either. Which makes it difficult because that causes problems. Because since we don't know them and they don't know us, when we talk about a subject, we might be thinking we're talking about the same subject, but we're not. So again, we have to learn to talk with your culture, and you have to learn to talk with ours to get good communications. And without communication, you're going to have hardship, you're going to have heartburn and everything else. Okay, and what we're doing right now in this location is the Lewis and Clark expedition came through in the early 1800s. And as they came through, they met different Indian peoples, and they went to find the Pacific Ocean, find a way to there. That was just the first of many non-natives to come into our country. And there's a legacy, a result of that. The legacy could have been different, but unfortunately it wasn't. It was a more legacy of conquest. So the Americans came in, they took our lands. Basically what they happened, they'd be on the Oregon Trail or California Trail, and some just got tired and ended up setting up where they got tired at. And then towns started growing. And then all these people, like Fort Hall, we had 50,000 people come through there in 1 year. And when you think about that, that is a big problem, because when you have 50,000 people coming through on a trek somewhere, they have to eat. So the early ones, they find game right alongside the roads or the trails. But the next group of people that come through, they have to go a little bit further away, and then pretty soon they have to go miles and miles, and pretty soon there might not be anything for them to eat. So a lot of these wagon trains, the later ones, they had a lot of starvation because there's nothing to eat. And like we were nomadic. So like we'd come to Fort Hall for the winter time. And the Lemhi people, they be up here in the winter time because the rivers don't freeze, so you have water year-round. And the temperatures are pretty mild here compared to other places around here. So we would winter here, but then in the summer we'd be elsewhere. We'd be out looking for salmon, we'd be out hunting, we'd be gathering berries, camas root, and everything else that we need to survive the following winter. Or we'd be over...
A person wearing glasses and a headband with red and white stripes holds a microphone in one hand while raising a pink object toward the upper left. Behind them is a map display on a stand.
Chasing the buffalo. Well, when we come back, all of a sudden there's a town here. Now what do? We're dispossessed without even knowing it. So then we have to find somewhere else to live, because if we try to stay here, there'll be conflict, because we're all competing for the same resource. But where we used to camp, there's a town. So where do we go? And so that's part of the aftermath of the Lewis and Clark expedition. The second aftermath is we faced almost a century and a half of genocide and ethnic cleansing. And part of it is unintentional ethnic cleansing, because just the example I gave you, when we come back here, there's somebody else here, and they are staying year-round. So we're no longer here. We have to go somewhere else, or we'll be killed off, because, numbers count. So that was the legacy. And then, of course, the government wanted to assimilate us, turn us into non-Indians. And so they took all of our young people and sent them to these boarding schools. In the first 10 years of boarding school, something like 20,000 kids died of disease and homesickness. Because as soon as the kid went into a boarding school, their hair was shaved off, all their traditional clothing were taken away, they were put in uniforms and were forced to speak English. Males were forced to become laborers. They tried to teach them to farm. The females were basically made into house servants. But if a kid had a lot of intelligence, unfortunately that intelligence was wasted because they were forced into menial roles. So that's the cultural genocide that was going on. And unfortunately, the boarding school system just ended in the last 20 years. There's young people today, your age and younger probably, that went to the boarding schools. Of course, the brutality ended in the 80s, or in the 70s. In the 60s, the brutality was still there. God, I keep remembering about this antenna here. So anyway, that's part of the legacy. But we are survivors, too. We have survived that. And our population has risen since the 1920s. 1920s was a bad time for us. But that was good for anthropology, because at that time, the main idea was to salvage all the knowledge of the indigenous peoples, because it was truly thought that we would become extinct, because we're at our lowest.
A person wearing glasses and a headband holds a microphone while raising a pink object toward the ceiling. Behind them is a map on the wall. The setting appears to be an indoor presentation space.
Population, tuberculosis is rampant. People were starving to death because there was no food. And of course, right after the 20s came the Great Depression. And of course, everybody suffered then. Not just Indian people, but everybody. And then you had another mass migration with the Dust Bowl occurring at the same time. So, there's been major dynamics that have occurred in our continent over the last few hundred years. Major population shifts, major land shifts and everything. So, and it's still going on. You probably all read about all these Californians coming here to Idaho, wanting to change things around to their way. Well, if you go to California, it's people as far as you can see. If you go to the East Coast, it's the same way. It's only in between that's relatively empty, but they're filling up fast. But where are they going to all go? They can't build big cities everywhere in the desert because there's no water. But again, people are starting to learn, well, you have to start recycling the water, because there's only so much water available, especially during a drought. Like we've had a 7-year drought here. This is the wettest year we've had in 7 years. But we haven't had any rain, a couple months now. Is this going to produce anything? Well, for me, I hope not, because I have to ride my motorcycle through it. But we need that rain. We need the water. We need everything, because I just read in the paper this morning, the reservoirs are some of them are only a third full now. And we've got a winter ahead before those things start filling up again. So what's going to happen? Are we going to run out of water again? We don't know. So anyway, our lives and your lives are all interconnected. What about the future? Well, I would like to see the environmental movement become more educated about the world that they live in, because some of them are really radical and they don't really understand what they're doing. Putting a spike in a tree to stop somebody from cutting it down is non-productive. Poisoning animals so there's no research, that's non-productive. You're supposed to be trying to save the animals, but yet you poison them, or you let them out of their cages. Well, these animals can't live on their own because they've never known freedom. So you let a rat out of its cage, well, what's going to happen? It's going to get eaten up by the first predator that sees it. So, that's some things you have to think. What about things that, what happens if the animal that you release, if you're one of these PETA people, what if this animal is released, has a communicable disease? You might start a major pandemic. So again, the environmental movement has some crazies in that, but those crazies need to be policed by the environmental movement.
A person wearing glasses, a headband with red and white stripes, and a black shirt holds a microphone with one arm raised, holding a pink object aloft. Behind them is a map on a stand in an indoor setting.
The environmental movement overall, though, is a good thing, because government tends to be like a bulldozer. They want to remove one tree, but they destroy the whole forest to remove one tree. So, and of course, what happens when you do that? You've destroyed everything that lives within that forest or is affected by it. You pollute the water, because the water that's absorbed in the ground now runs off and pollutes the rivers, and eventually we have to drink that water. So, it's important to have an environmental movement. What else do I see for the future? I see the American people starting to think more like we do. In other words, being part of the world, not being separate. I see, hopefully, more tolerance of people other than yourselves. I see, hopefully, the end to wars, unnecessary wars. Some wars are necessary to protect other people, to stop an aggressor. Those are necessary wars, but like this current war that we're in, I think is totally unnecessary. And I've been to war. I've killed people. I have people's blood on my hands. I have those nightmares. Those ghosts of war will be with me the rest of my life. And the people that decide to go to war should have that same experience, because these are our children that we're sending off to war now, our grandchildren, by people that have never seen combat. So it's easy, if you've never seen combat, to say, hey, let's go to war. It's big and glorious, and we'll project our power to some helpless people somewhere else. Well, right now there's close to 2,000 dead, and I think I saw in paper something like 13 to 15,000 wounded. But the uncounted wounds of that war are the ghosts that these soldiers, male and female, will have to see. Their friends blown away, the enemy blown away, innocent people blown away. And is there any real need for that war? Right now we're kind of stuck in it, but it should have never happened. So I would, that's what, my vision, my hope for the future is that our future leaders will think many, many times before they react with military force. And of course, as Native Americans, it's our legacy to go to war. We're warriors. and a warrior doesn't shirk his duty, his or her duty. And so, even though
A person wearing sunglasses and a headband with red and white stripes holds a microphone and raises a pink object in their right hand while standing in front of a map display.
we don't agree with the war, we go because that's what we have to do to live with ourselves. But then, one thing that happens with our peoples is when we come back, we go through healing ceremonies, which helps considerably. I went almost 10 years before I got my healing. But I still have the nightmares. I still see those ghosts, and I will to the day I die. But anyway, I would like to conclude by welcoming you here, and then also a question and answer period. And how do we stand on time?
You got about 15 minutes, so we have plenty of time for questions. If you folks do have some questions, please raise your hand. I can bring the microphone around. That way everybody can share in the question. We can hear them. Does anyone have any questions for Ron? Okay, we'll start right up here.
First of all, it saddens me for the loss of the language, and of course with the language is the associated culture. What is happening as far as, are they recording, or how are the elders and their language being archived and that?
Well, with language preservation, it's kind of been hit and miss throughout the years. And one of the first things you do is you try to get a hold of the elders and tape as much as you can, even videotape them. And of course, with new technology and stuff, it's getting easier and easier to collect information. But the major problem there is in the 60s and 70s was turmoil for the whole country with that war and the hippie movement and all that. But the generation of anthropologists that are the teachers today, or the old timers, they were of the school where they'd come into the reservation and go right in people's houses and do their studies, and they're pretty arrogant. As a result of that, our elders today that were young people, like my age back then, they don't want to talk to anthropologists. And Native Americans going into anthropology, there's only a handful of us that are anthropologists. And we will become the new anthropologists, because who better to study our people than us, to explain our cultures to the world at large. So, but as we go in, like if we have elders and we know we need to record their stories, we need to record the language and everything, but some of them don't even want to talk to us because of the abuses that occurred in the 60s and 70s. So that's that's the first step, is to collect that information. The second step is to start teaching the language. And all the different Indian
A person wearing glasses, a black shirt, and a red, white, and blue headband holds a microphone and raises a pink object in their right hand while speaking in front of an educational map display.
nations have these language preservation programs. They teach, but only the little ones. The people my generation and my children, who are in their 30s, they don't speak the language. And we need to do it across all age ranges, not just that small, the little ones. And we only do it for a certain amount. But see, we're starting to write our languages, but we have to write in our language, and we have to have more than one or two people writing. Because if you teach people how to read and write, but you have nothing to read and write, you're wasting your time. And that's the next step in language preservation, is to develop literature in the language. And that's what I work on. Okay, any more questions?
All right, and another question. I'll come around with the microphone.
Do you know why the spelling of Limhi changed from L-I to L-E over the years?
That I don't know. In fact, that word was given by the Mormons. It's one of their words. The people that lived up here, they were called the Adiduka. In other words, the salmon eaters. They didn't call themselves Limhi. Now today they call themselves Limhi, but that's not what they're originally called. It's basically like, that came into common use. In other words, but it's not what they would call. If they had their choice, they wouldn't call themselves that. A lot of things changed from the original spellings to today. Probably some person thought the I was an E, so they wrote an E in. Yeah. So, you know, like when you go from handwritten to typewritten, somebody might have thought that was an E instead of an I, so that's how the Lamhi came in. And then once you start having a lot of documents with that, then that's how it came in. That's probably how it happened. I don't know for sure. But that's why I'd speculate on.
All right, do we have any other questions? Yeah, all right. Let's please give Ron a warm welcome, or a warm thank you, actually, for joining us here in the 10 of Many Voices. Thank you again. And remember, folks, we do have programs here in the 10 of Many Voices every hour on the hour. Our program schedule is located in the back. Please check that out. Our next program coming up at the...